Hi, I'm Esther.
And I'm Sean.
I write about AI news here at TechTarget in Massachusetts.
And I edit Esther's stories.
We're here to talk with tech experts about everything AI and ChatGPT.
Don't forget Google Gemini.
Whether it's who's ahead in the generative AI race, the metaverse, digital twins, or even the latest in autonomous vehicles, we've got it covered. Right, Sean?
Yep, we've got it covered.
Welcome, everyone, to another Targeting AI podcast. We are now officially in season 2, which is pretty exciting. But we are here with TechTarget Editorial's government, regulation, and compliance writer, Makenzie Holland, mostly to talk about Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris' relationship and views on tech and AI. We'll also touch a bit on Trump's stance on tech and AI. You and TechTarget's editorial Pat Thibodeau have compiled a comprehensive guide on the candidates' positions on tech and tech views. Thank you for that. So, under President Biden, Kamala Harris was the AI Caesar, and it was she who brought the CEOs of OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, and Anthropic to the White House all last year. So, what did those White House meetings accomplish? What effect did the notion of voluntary standards for AI have on the AI industry?
I'm happy to weigh in on this, and thank you for having me on the podcast. It's really exciting. As you mentioned, Harris was instrumental in bringing those top tech leaders to the White House and gaining those voluntary commitments a year ago. And I think some of the things that we've seen from that is there's been a lot of effort on watermarking. We've seen companies like Meta, Google announce their efforts on that front to really take efforts of notifying which images are created by AI. I think some of the other commitments is a little unclear as far as transparency into AI models, data sharing, and kind of these other elements. It's been pretty quiet. And on Friday, the Biden-Harris administration did release an update talking about the Biden-Harris administration executive order on AI. And they announced that Apple has added itself to that list of companies committing to AI safety as well as secure development of AI models. The problem is they really didn't include any kind of updates on what those companies have done to really fulfill those commitments. And so, except for those things that I've mentioned, the watermarking efforts that we've seen, that was one of the commitments that companies made and that we've seen them kind of fulfill on. But the other commitments, as far as transparency, it's unclear. We still have a lot to see on that front from those companies.
So I take it that the critics of these meetings said, well, they can anything. The proof is what they do, and so far that seems to be borne out. Like they haven't
Yeah.
done all that much.
Yeah, and that is the con of kind of leaning on tech to lead the way for regulating this kind of technology, and it does exemplify, I think, the limitations of that, of relying on tech to lead the way on regulating themselves.
The tech giants are probably pleased with their ability to self-regulate. You mentioned the executive order, so that was kind of a big deal when it came out. It was the first time I think the U.S. government had produced a comprehensive plan or framework on AI. I think the Trump presidency had a few minor things on it. So Harris essentially led that whole process, right? But how meaningful was the act of doing it, talking to all the different agencies, and the document that it produced, that big, huge executive order, which is like 500 pages or something?
Yeah, I think the effect is significant in terms of laying the groundwork, because there's this huge focus from the Biden Harris administration on AI safety and trustworthiness. And so, through the executive order, they're leading by example by requiring federal agencies to help develop some of these standards for AI safety and AI testing, and essentially vetting their own projects with AI. And so, in the update that they released on Friday, they kind of outlined some of the work that's been done in the 270-day benchmark set by the executive order. And NIST, for example, they came out with their AI risk management framework pretty quickly last year, and now they've added a generative AI section, which a lot of businesses do turn to that document to the AI RMF for, okay, how do I safely adopt this technology in my enterprise? How do I mitigate, manage risk? Looking to those kind of foundational documents is really helpful for businesses. And then also, it essentially kind of lays the groundwork, as I mentioned, for potential legislation down the road. Because, again, right now we've seen this struggle in Congress to agree on what AI legislation should look like, whether it should happen. By the government leading the way and having agencies kind of test how they're vetting AI, projects, how they're following certain standards and guidance and developing those standards and guidance, it could eventually lead the way to Congress pointing to this as examples of being like, we have these standards now. This could be what we make legislation and requirements for other companies. And I mean, we might not see that right away, but I think that's kind of what this executive order was laying the groundwork for.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. It's kind of like the groundwork before the groundwork, kind of like the foundation, I feel like is what you're saying. So,
Yeah.
like, basically, you're saying it could lead them, if there's a need be in the future, for them to refer and say, let's just make this what everybody follows, right?
Yeah. And I mean, because the Biden Harris administration has not been quiet about their desire for AI legislation, even privacy legislation. They call for that in the executive order on AI, but there are limits to what the executive branch can do. They can't legislate, that's up to Congress. And so, by them doing what they can in their capacity through measures like this executive order, it is doing that foundational groundwork, kind of for Congress.
Do you think, let's say Donald Trump is elected, do you think then there will still be elements of the Biden executive order that will still hold in Congress?
That's a great question. I think it's a little unclear because we've obviously seen Trump attack the executive order, and we've seen, in his speech at the Republican National Convention, him talk about pulling back on regulation and not really taking that approach to industry and kind of letting industry lead the way on innovation. And so I think it's up in the air because a lot of that executive order is focused on AI safety. I kind of wonder what arguments will be made against that, from the Trump administration, if it's not regulation in particular, if it is just, supporting safe development of AI. I'm unsure. I'm unsure if that's going to be something that the Trump administration would go against. I don't think that they're going to push AI legislation and regulating AI. That's been something that Trump's been very vocal about not doing. But yeah, I think that they probably would walk back this desire to have a hand in how tech companies are developing AI.
So then, if Congress did take the baton and go forward on some of it, he might veto it. It might not come in.
With what we've seen from Congress, there was a huge segment with Chuck Schumer leading numerous AI policy sessions with big tech companies, and everybody was expecting something to come of that. And while Schumer has proposed an AI policy roadmap, it wasn't actually legislation. So if legislation isn't going to pass under the Biden administration, will it pass if there's a Trump administration? I doubt it.
Gotcha. Thanks.
What do you think might be different? Because Trump has been in office before, right? So, do you think that there might be a shift from what he did before and what he's going to do now?
That's a great question. And I think it would be interesting because obviously, AI has been around for generations and we've known about the technology. The Trump administration actually did sign an executive order in 2019 supporting federal R&D into AI. However, ChatGPT, when it came on the scene in 2022, really changed the narrative and really placed this significant focus on AI through by Congress and the administration. And so, the Biden and Harris administration is really focused on this, really focused on that AI safety part. And so it would be interesting under a Trump administration to see how he tackles this narrative now that AI is so prominent and such a talked about topic. But yeah, I think because the situation was different under the previous Trump administration, AI was not so front and center. It's unclear exactly how that might translate to a next Trump administration, just because I feel like the conversation and the landscape about AI is different than what it was under the previous Trump administration.
That's true. I mean, one of the things that we've kind of heard, and I've heard this, you probably heard this, that regulation follows slowly, especially, and there's usually little progress. And under the Biden and Harris, although there's been a lot of talk, there's been also little progress. So, how much of the same can we expect under just a Harris administration? Like, for example, some high profile Republicans have been vocal backers of breaking up the technology giants. What is Trump's view on this?
Well, I think what we can take away from what Trump has said, especially during the Republican National Convention, is his desire to back away from regulating tech companies. And especially when it comes to breaking up tech companies, we did see a slew of antitrust reform bills introduced when Biden first took office, and those failed to pass. It's hard to get a lot of traction behind this idea of breaking up companies. However, under the Trump administration, the DOJ did sue Google for search monopolization. So there is this kind of alignment on areas of concern like monopolies over search and over advertising. But I think there would be a step back on the regulatory front about what you actually do about reining in these tech companies, because there is, especially on the Trump side, this prioritization of innovation and letting these tech companies lead rather than slogging them down with rules along the way on how to get to those innovations safely. So there could be definitely that difference from a regulatory perspective under a Trump administration versus a Harris administration.
It seems to me that you think that there will be a more lenient approach with a Trump administration than with a Biden administration. I mean, with a Trump administration than with a Harris administration when it comes to AI and technology.
Again, I think Harris has this choice to make because Harris has been largely backed and supported by Silicon Valley. And she is the one that brought these tech companies to the table to discuss AI safety. And she got those voluntary commitments from these companies. And so I can't even say for sure that Harris would be super strong on regulating these big tech companies because she does have these ties and the support from Silicon Valley. So I think it will be really interesting to see either of their approaches going forward, because I think there is a fine line that they're trying to walk of safely developing these technologies while also considering what you need to do to maybe rein in these superpowers that have so much control over the market and have so much control over the development of these technologies.
But yet, even though Harris is from California, has campaigned with a lot of tech money, she also has a record as San Francisco District Attorney, California Attorney General, and I'm pushing back on Silicon Valley on some issues, right? Data privacy, online child safety, cyberbullying. So I think she probably thinks she can do both, be
Mhm.
for innovation and for curbing what's perceived as the excesses of the tech industry. Her past behavior, doing some like regulatory, prosecutorial stuff with tech, is that an indication of her future stance on big tech? Do you think, or
Oh,
not?
absolutely. And I think you're already seeing that translate into her work on AI because again, like they work with the executive order that's very much focused on AI safety. And even before that, the AI Bill of Rights really touched on algorithmic bias. It touched on harms to consumers, on privacy issues. And so that's been a huge focus that Harris has brought to AI as an issue. And she spoke on this during some remarks in London in 2023 before the Global AI Safety Summit, just about the focus on addressing the risks of AI. And so I think Harris will be very focused on these particular aspects, on these particular risks associated with these technologies. Because privacy, again, she has a background where she focuses on privacy, she has a background where she focuses on bias. And so she will bring that, I think, into attention and continue that focus with tech and by having those conversations with probably these big tech leaders, as we've seen evidenced on AI.
This might be a hard question to answer, Mackenzie, but I wonder because one of the big questions last year was this lack of unification, because we did see the array of tech leaders going into the White House, going into Capitol Hill, but there's still this like lack of like this is the one safety rule that we as the United States will follow, or this is the one that everyone will follow. We just have the New York hiring law and then CCPA, right? Do you think that either Harris or Trump have the ability or could possibly do that, bring that one unification?
I don't know if that would be the US approach, honestly, that there would be one rule or one law like the EUAI Act, like GDPR. Those historically, I just don't think that the US would follow in the footsteps of the EU in that way. I feel as if we will see maybe pieces of legislation targeting specific aspects of AI, or the US will continue to lean on existing laws and policies. They have, even under the Biden Harris administration, they've frequently pointed to the FTC and its ability to tackle these issues of AI risks and big tech companies. So I don't know. I think we've already seen Congress struggling to pull together a legislative package on AI. I think it will continue to be a struggle going forward, despite Harris saying that AI legislation is needed. And I was listening to a conversation this morning by the Office of Science and Technology Policies Director Radi Prabhakar, and she also mentioned the need for AI legislation and kind of that grounding factor to say this is what you have to do, because you're right, there's no set requirement for the U.S. to follow in terms of AI and AI development, except for kind of the bounds of existing consumer protection laws. So I think we could eventually see legislation around something specific related to AI, but not some broad package like what we've seen in the EU with the EU AI Act.
That makes sense. So we're getting into the end of this segment with you, Makenzie, but you've been a great guest. One last question. Obviously, Harris is from California, grew up in California, has been elected office in California. That's, a lot of people see California as the center of the tech world, even though there's tech and AI companies everywhere, the concentration of them, Silicon Valley. Where a lot of the generative AI innovation, no offense to Mistral, who's doing this in France, but what does that tell us about her potential relationship with AI and tech? They're her neighbors. They're in her backyard. I mean, she's for safety and regulation, but essentially, a lot of people see her as kind of on the same side as big tech. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's already been evidenced by her work with gaining the voluntary commitments from these big technology companies on AI. I think we'll continue to see her having those conversations and bringing big tech to the table, which, there's probably pros and cons to that, because if they're so involved with kind of this self-regulation of themselves, it raises the question of, how accountable does that make them if they're really involved in the regulation of themselves versus maybe government taking an outside approach and weighing all these things that big tech has brought up and brought to the table, but coming up with their own plan for regulation. It's yet to be seen, what Harris is going to do, and she does have that decision to make about her friendliness with the tech sector versus the need for regulation, and that is going to be a big question that her administration would have to handle, if she wins the election in November.
So thanks, Makenzie, and keep up the great work in your coverage of government regulation and compliance in the tech industry and AI in particular. And thanks for your great work with Pat Thibodeau on that election guide. Where can readers and listeners find that election guide?
Yeah, I think we have it on the CIO site. You just look up kind of where candidates stand on big tech, and you'll be able to find the guide. It's got right now the presidential candidates include some independents like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., along with Trump and Harris's stance on tech. So look that up, and thank you both for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Makenzie.
Thanks a lot. The Targeting AI podcast from TechTarget would now like to welcome another California resident, Ray Wang, founder and CEO of Constellation Research, to our recording studio, virtual as it is. But thanks, Ray.
Hey, Esther, Sean, it's great to be here. How you guys doing?
Well, we're doing great. We're all wrapped up in this political thing here. Whoever knew that tech would be so political? But Ray, You've been aware of Kamala Harris and her political career for a couple of decades because you're in California, she's California. And so she's looked at Silicon Valley tech money, right, for a lot of her campaign finances, right, for 4 runs: state, DA, AG, vice president, and now US president. So to me, that indicates that she's more than receptive to allowing tech and AI sectors to innovate without excessive regulation. What do you think?
I would think that would be the perception everybody would have outside of the Bay Area. Because, in general, if you look at the politics of the Bay Area, it tends to run very liberal, very progressive. And that tends to reflect as the candidates raise money. And we've seen this. And what we've seen over the last 30, 40 years was really the vestiges of what was called the Burton machine. And the Burton machine was basically, everything from Willie Brown to Nancy Pelosi to Gavin Newsom, and Kamala Harris ran in those circles. And I think that's why there's a perception that the Bay Area is an area that actually supports those progressive causes, and the candidates themselves are educated in those areas that understand technology and the need for a libertarian view for technology policy. But I stress the libertarian view because I think that's important to understand that tech doesn't necessarily want to be governed. Individuals who've been successful in tech don't necessarily want to be told what to do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that tech would say Kamala Harris is their candidate, because we saw what happened as Joe Biden was coming to the end of his campaign. And there was enough outpouring to say that these policies are not necessarily working for tech. And we have to do something different. And so let's take crypto, for example. That's a big conversation. Is crypto a Republican or is crypto a Democrat issue? Well, it really should be neither, right? That really should be how they should be looked at. It should be a policy that's put out there. But, the Democratic view was that crypto was bad. Gary Gensler was good. He was going to regulate crypto and put it into place. Prior to maybe 2 years ago, the Republicans were also like, we don't want this. This is bad. Country backed, digital currencies are evil. It will take down the dollar. And then all of a sudden it became political again because Trump decided a few weeks ago to show up at the Bitcoin conference and say, let's go get rid of Gensler. Let's go get rid of, we're going to be like the center of the universe for crypto. And then it became political. I would say that it isn't if Harris is pro-tech or not. I think it's just different shades. If you were to look at the CHIPS Act, right? The CHIPS Act showed that, hey, this is, the Democrats are big on technology. They're going to back things. They're going to protect our industries, right? It's basically a bailout for Intel. That's really what that was. I mean, at the end of the day, you have a underperforming semiconductor company on one hand called Intel, and you have NVIDIA, which is not underperforming and decided to look at this in a very different way. Intel 50 years out, of course, right? The company's middle-aged out, and most companies in tech that have middle-aged out haven't fared very well. So I don't think there should be a way to look at, whether Harris is more pro-tech, less tech, but they definitely take a lot of tech money. They definitely take a lot of Hollywood money, and that's something very important to look at.
True, forgot about Hollywood money.
Yeah, that's a very important note. So basically, what you're saying is they follow whoever show me the money is what you basically just said to me.
It's follow the money. It's basically follow the money. All across the world, right? I think the tech policy, look, tech is America's biggest industry. It is the thing that sets us apart. It is the part of the economy that has unbridled growth. I mean, everything was falling apart, but tech is still doing really well. It's double-digit growth. We don't know what the earnings are, but this is, you see in the earnings weeks that, tech somehow has double-digit growth. Everybody else is growing in single digits. And so you have to support the industries that make your country strong, but you also need to make sure that they're not out there in an unfair advantage, or if there's such a thing as an unfair advantage. And so you've got to make sure the checks and balances are in place. So we'll see how this plays out, right? I mean, I wrote a book called Everybody Wants to Rule the World, and it's really about digital giants battling it out. And at the end of the day, if the digital giants and the tech companies are making lives harder, are making things more expensive, are taking away opportunities, the regulators will come. They don't care where they took the money. They will come. So it's a question of which party thinks that you've crossed the line on a certain issue, which party feels, that this is not a fair piece. So take Section 230 and, the ability to regulate speech on the internet or for social networking platforms, like what is considered as speech or not. Both parties hate social media companies just as much as they say they love them, and they also take the same amount of money from lobbyists. so, so we're gonna see what's going on. So you're right, Esther. Follow the money.
That's interesting. But, obviously Harris has also been known to socialize with the members of the tech community and attend events at tech companies in California. And her brother-in-law, Tony West, is chief legal counsel at Uber, right? So
Right.
how can we expect these relationships to cover her stance on AI? Can we expect it to cover it at all?
Well, I think really what it comes down to is we've seen that it's the policymakers and their staffers are the ones that bring those attentions. And then I think if you're more embedded in the tech community, you tend to do better. Let's go back to the first administration of, Barack Obama. They built a CTO and a CIO of the federal government. That never happened before, right? And the network that happened between Silicon Valley and DC got built. And that's the first part of it. And you had, Vivek Kundra as the CIO. You had, Anish Chopra as, the CTO. And there were ambassadors coming back and forth between tech and DC, right? And that continued on, right? And regardless of the president, which administration is probably a little bit more rocky with the Republicans than it was with the Democrats. But there was that pipeline of trying to bring both the Valley and DC closer together. And there's a lot of people that are still trying to do that, right? Whether it's in cybersecurity, there's a lot of cooperation there. Whether it's what's happening with AI policy, whether it's happening with quantum, you do see that, the bridges back to policymakers is a lot better than before. And it's less political than people realize. People are a little bit more friendly in private than they are in public.
Harris is, she was a prosecutor and she makes a big deal about that. And as she probably should. And so, but how do you expect that prosecutorial mindset to affect her views on tech and AI regulation? I mean, do you think she's going to ratchet up regulator scrutiny? Like she's not going to fire the head of the FTC, and the FTC is going to keep probably, pursuing antitrust actions. So how do you expect her prosecutorial mindset to affect regulators and legal actions against the tech giants if she's elected?
Sean, you're exactly right. That's where it's going to head next, right? Let's take Lena Khan. Lovely concept of antitrust, well-intentioned, poorly executed. And that's really where we are. But would she fire Lena Khan? No, she would not fire Lena Khan because that is one of the populist rallying cries on the Democrat side that, hey, big tech is evil and we're going to go after evil Microsoft, evil Google, evil Apple, evil Facebook, right? These big tech giants need to be stopped. But you know what? We'll ignore Live Nation and Taylor Swift had an issue. I mean, let's start with antitrust. If you had an antitrust problem, it would be Ticketmaster. It would not be Apple. I mean, you can choose not to buy an Apple device, right? I mean, Ticketmaster, I need to see a concert. I don't have any choices. Like I'm really locked in. Let's understand antitrust. If you saw a President Kamala Harris get taking Lena Khan out, then you would know that she fully gets where tech people are at, right? We've had a dearth of IPOs. We've had M&A scrubbed because of this, right? One could argue that the Figma acquisition by Adobe acquisition of Figma and the potential acquisition of Google and Wiz were all blocked with antitrust in the background saying this is not going to pass. So but that would be my test, right? Would you get rid of Lena Khan? Would be the question, because tech wants to get rid of Lena Khan. They feel like she's not really helping. So if you ask all the people,
Trump will get rid of, and Trump would get.
Trump will get rid of Lena Khan. That's easy. Like that's going to happen. But that's just one aspect, right? Antitrust. I think the other aspect is H-1B workers. And H-1B is a great example of how people classified it. Like Republicans hate immigrants. They're not going to show up. No, Republicans dislike illegal immigrants just like every other American. Everybody loves immigrants. And Democrats have actually couched the issue as, we should let all immigration in, whether it's H-1B skilled workers to the guy that's actually helping you build your house to, the person that's actually helping you staff a factory floor. Right. They're all equally important issues in that sense, but they've placed it in a way that says Democrats are for immigrants And therefore the Valley's like, oh my God, I'm an immigrant too. We have to support all immigrants. And the Republicans like, no, 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 no. We're talking about legal immigration. And then they look really, really bad, right? But over the last decade, we've realized that, oh, wait, I think everybody wants legal immigration. Everybody knows we need skills-based immigration. And you want to bring the best and brightest into your country. How do we do that? And so that's an issue where you'd say traditionally, the tech brothers and tech bros and, the venture capitalists and everybody they're all big for, the progressive side and the Democratic side of the House. Now, on the other hand, there are folks that are supporting the Republican candidates, like the David Sachs folks and the Elon Musks now, who are Republicans, as they've blatantly said they are, and traditionally like a Larry Ellison, right, and folks like that have come in and leaned on that side of the House. And what they're for is really just they just want fair competition, right? If there's competition, it should be fair. And if you're going to do it and protect tech, they know that if you get a tax break, you're going to get regulated. If you ask for a favor, you're going to be asked to be regulated. And so it's actually more of a libertarian mindset than a conservative mindset.
Speaking of Elon Musk, who is now a Republican, like you mentioned, one of the things that he recently did was share was a parody of Harris, AI ad of Harris, which I thought was pretty interesting. Did you see that, Ray?
I think he was more infatuated on Obama in that and the AI fashion show.
But moving on, how do you think Harris stands on U.S. technology competitiveness in the world economy, especially in regard to China? How much importance do you think she will assign to remaining competitive or dominant in the AI race with China? And what effects will raising tariffs on all goods from China, as Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance wants to do, affect the U.S. tech and AI sectors?
There is a belief, right? And I grew up in the Rust Belt. I grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, that the country was sold out by the elites when factory jobs went away. But let's be honest, right? Factory jobs were impossible to keep, especially given, right, we locked competitiveness in terms of volume. We were competing against lower cost wages, which we couldn't do on a union basis. And, people said, oh, well, people are going to evolve, right? They're going to be able to take on, knowledge worker jobs, right? And so, okay, fine. That was the perspective. Fast forward to where we are today, 40 years out. There's the same thing. It's like, oh, AI is not going to take away your job. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. This AI thing is going to be fine, right? And so I would say that the tariffs are there for multiple reasons. The tariffs are there because we're getting dumped on by China. And we also have to protect ourselves in terms of the global national security war, in terms of chips and in terms of that technology. But it's really more reflective of the fact that the US is more of a free market system than industrial policy. And let's take an example here. Why did China go to EVs? The popular view is, oh, they were being green. They really wanted to, get to an advanced technology. They were trying to be, really thoughtful in terms of how this was going to change their economy. The reality isn't that. Reality is very simple, right? They realize that they don't want to be dependent on the, Arabs for oil, right? They don't want to be dependent on Japan, America, or the Germans for engine technology. And to get engine technology right, it's really, really hard. But to go from, engine to EVs, the equivalent of going from landline to 5G in like 10 years. But in order to do that, what do you have to do? You need lots of electricity. And so what's China doing? They built 1,000 gigawatts of coal-fired power. And they build 7 to 9 nuclear power plants every year, 100 megawatt small modular reactors. And so what have they done? They've basically reduced their dependency on the West for propulsion. They've basically built vertically integrated supply chains that actually allow them to take everything for battery technology. And now we're dependent on them for battery tech. That's really good industrial policy. You can't do that in a free market system. It doesn't really work that way. And so the closest we're doing is like every once in a while we discover that we don't like free market systems. We have to have industrial policy. And so tariffs sound very, very popular. People are like, okay, we're going to tariff these people. But there is a certain amount of fairness, right? If your cars are being exported to Europe and they put a 40% tariff and Europe we don't put a 40% tariff on our European cars, we're like, hey, we believe in free markets, but you're tariffing our cars, so we're going to have to tariff you back. And in China's case, it's a little bit different. In China's case, it's kind of like, we're dumping everything onto you to take over our market. yes, you need to intervene. But the problem is that's how you're supposed to resolve in a World Trade Organization, in a World Trade environment, except we don't have a fair World Trade Organization. So therefore, we're putting tariffs in place. And I think both administrations would do the same, because if tariffs were such a bad idea, the Biden administration would have continued what was done. It's the only thing they continued on a Trump policy.
Well, in fact, it started with Obama, so it's a straight line from Obama to Trump to Biden to probably Harris, and keeping the tariffs up and
So
keeping it
I
where
don't
it
think
stands.
that's going to go away. But the competitiveness with China is a real issue.
Let's touch on JD Vance for a minute because we forgot to talk about him.
How do you know he's still going to be the vice president candidate?
We don't. He is as of now. He is as of now.
Signs are made, yes, but
All right. As we recorded this, he's at. But Dan Quayle stayed vice presidential candidate amid many gaffes. I think.
no, it's not about the gaps. It's about we don't know what the matchup is going to be.
In any event, JD Vance is a protege of Peter Thiel. He comes from that sector of the tech business. He worked in tech. He knows tech. Does that counterbalance, Trump's perceived, or does that make the Trump ticket stronger on tech, or what?
No, it makes the Trump tickets stronger in Midwest swing states and the Rust Belt. It's not about the tech play, but it does make it more palatable to parts of the technology community that are much more libertarian, parts of the technology community that looks for less regulation. And now the crypto community is 100% behind Trump.
Yeah, that was an interesting turn of events, and that was a pretty smart move by Trump. He's putting Harris on the spot now to talk about crypto, because I think in the crypto industry, there's
Well, you got to wait for the policy paper. They're going to have to brief her 3 weeks later. Then maybe they'll have something, right? Because they're
yeah,
late
but
on.
in the crypto industry, as you would agree, but there's libertarians, there's conservatives, and there's liberals. So she could get votes there
Should be
too.
nonpartisan. It really should be nonpartisan. But here's what's really going on, and I think I understand why the Trump campaign did what they have. There's an outflow of capital. People are moving to Dubai mostly because they don't have the FACTA checks that are required when you actually open an account to go invest in crypto. And so there are a good number of American citizens that are leaving for a golden visa in Dubai. These tend to be high net worth individuals and ultra high net worth individuals who want to invest in crypto without being overregulated with financial controls like FACTA. And more importantly, the UAE has some very, very well defined crypto rules and regulations. So basically, we have an outflow of capital. We've got a lot of foreign direct investment going to the UAE because of that. And you have to stop that, right? Because the US needs that level of direct foreign investment. And what we're seeing is the crypto industry is heading in that direction, and a lot of crypto and blockchain startups are on Dubai because of those protections. The US can't lose to that. And so in order to bring everyone back, you're going to have to put regulations for crypto, clear defined regulations, right? Here are the guardrails, but not overreaching regulations in place if you ever want that industry to succeed. And so that's one of the very interesting parts where everyone's asking for regulations because they don't want to know exactly what guardrails they have so that they can actually start operating.
Good point.
So, if Harris is elected, should be a relatively young president. Does that indicate to you that she'll be more receptive to and knowledgeable about technology than the last two much older presidents?
I don't think age is the factor, but what you're going to find out is you'll find a lot more Californians on the ticket, right? More people on the West Coast, more younger people in tech. You'll see more people that will shape the policy decisions that have much more technology backgrounds, and I think that's very helpful.
Who's going to be better for the healthy growth of generative AI technology, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
I actually don't think it matters. I think what's going to happen is both sides actually believe that the ethics is important, and what we do for an ethical and responsible approach is needed. And so, for example, on deepfakes and misinformation, everybody benefits from a fair playing field. Everybody benefits from having that. On the ability to actually have access chips, what you're going to see is, I think Trump will take a harder stance against having our technologies exported. I think that's not going to be seen as good or bad. I think that's just a national security issue more than anything else. I think Harris will be able to be seen as someone that's actually more inclusive of bringing more types of workers into the U.S., right? And having more technology workers be able to come through. But I think the big shift that occurred was during the campaign. You saw how the Trump campaign changed their stance on a lot of tech policies, from Bitcoin to H-1B workers. And so we've seen the adjustment that actually has occurred. So I think in general, because of the outsized influence that tech has in the industry, you're going to see, in general, both candidates will be favorable to tech as opposed to what the perceptions were in the past. Right? There was a perception that Republicans and Trump were against tech, and the Democrats were for tech, and I think that lead and perception has changed in the last 6 months.
So do you think that when it comes to like AI safety and all the I guess the ethical stuff, it doesn't matter who's is who, right?
It doesn't matter because right now it's too early to put in the tech policy, even though it's too late because AI is already out of the box and the genie's out of the box. And that sounds very weird. If anybody was serious, we would go back and have a constitutional convention and say, what would our rights be today in a digital and AI age? Would I have my personal data? Would I have my genomics? Would I have all my, I don't know, search history and interactions and medical records and DNA as my property right? And if you were to ever violate my property rights without my permission, you'd be in trouble, right? If you want stuff, you have to ask permission, you ask for a value exchange, and every individual owned their record, then you would actually have a conversation, right? Could I be disconnected and not seen as a terrorist? Can I pay in cash still and not be tracked in my transactions? Right? That's the kind of questions we really need to have and really say, hey, what does our society look like? What does a free, democratically elected society look like in 2050? And what can you get away with? What can't you get away with? What are still your rights? And I think that's worth having a conversation.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna ask the final question, Ray. So, as a Tesla owner, this is Sean says you're a Tesla owner, right?
I am. Go ahead.
uh, you must know that Trump has been very negative about electric vehicles until Elon Musk obviously recently endorsed them that he switched the script. Meanwhile, President Biden has significantly reduced U.S. subsidies for Tesla and other EVs in the U.S. How is a Harris or Trump presidency likely to affect the EV industry and autonomous vehicle technology as well?
Okay, two separate issues. Yes, I am a Tesla owner. I put money down in 2008 for a car I didn't think I'd ever see, and the car showed up. I was lucky. I bought the car, but I was even luckier because my wife bought stock. So that's the Tesla story. I don't think the EV industry would exist without subsidies, and I think there are a lot of subsidies as well in the fossil fuel energy industry that actually allows for cars to be there. The EV subsidies should have gone away, but they were put in place to support the auto industry because it was a transition that was required for the big three and what we call ICE companies, which are the internal combustion engine companies, to be able to survive. The problem was it was perceived by Elon Musk as a giveaway because he was profitable and the other companies were not. And it was a giveaway, right? But they needed a certain period of time to do that. And Elon Musk was brilliant in the fact that he figured that he'll make money on carbon credits to the tune of almost $1 billion in Q2 of 2024 in terms of revenues that automakers have to pay him for carbon credits because they haven't offset their production. But the reality is all the green policies that have been put into place aren't necessarily profitable. They aren't things that are market based. And at some point, they will fall apart because there is no demand for those. And you saw already there's no demand for EVs, right? Detroit was moving. It's like, oh my God, we're all going to go to EVs. We're all going to get EVs. And you're like, dude, you're losing like $2,000, $3,000 per vehicle. Like, how are you going to get there, right? Tell me how much volume you're going to need before you get out of the place. So there's only 3 companies that are making money in EVs. It's Tesla, BYD, and one of the other Chinese car companies. That's it. The Koreans are barely making money, but they're starting to. But everyone's trying to get there. But this is a tough battle. So it's not about EVs or not EVs. It's really about a question of how quickly do you want to make the green transition. And I think that's the question you have to ask. And how long is it going to take? And are we picking winners or losers in the process? Or are we actually creating brand new industries that will actually ignite the world just like tech did? That's the jury that has to be out there, because right now what everyone sees, it's a lot of bailouts and it's a lot of policies that necessarily don't help, right? And I'd probably be on the counter. People are going to hate me when I say this, but the CHIPS Act is the worst of these bailouts, right? If tech wants to be free and tech wants to make sure that they're unfettered by government, you do not take money from the government, right? You do not have bailouts. You influence on policy and you do not take the money and you give the money. That's really how it's supposed to work. But as soon as tech started taking money from the government like this, then yes, it's going to get regulated, regardless of which party it is, because they're asking for favors in exchange for cash. And that's really what's going on. I think tech is that last bastion, that last industry that's supposed to go, free and disrupt things. But we're also in a situation where what we call asymmetric advantage. And let me explain how this works. Tech used to be the disruptor. It used to make things cheaper, more free, more open. And that's what the internet did. It was an amazing era. AI is not working that way. AI is more expensive. It's closed. Only a few players can actually participate, and you're under the mercy of those individual companies. And why I am a free market capitalist, we're going to see some regulation come in very quickly because we won't have access. Like take NVIDIA. They've decided that they weren't going to make the mistakes Microsoft, Intel, and Cisco made. They're saying, all mine, right? It's all mine, right? If you want to access the layer and it's going to be good, you're going to do it through CUDA, right? If you want to connect, we're going to use our protocols, right? And what they've basically said is like, we're never going to make that mistake of having a Microsoft, Intel, Cisco situation. We're going to take it all. It's ours. And nobody's there to stop them. So this is going to be interesting to watch. And so
that could be the next target of antitrust.
All right, now, so if Lena Khan wants to go after NVIDIA, that's going to be interesting, right? If Kamala Harris wants to go after NVIDIA, that's going to be interesting because you're going to need to actually open up that innovation. But the problem is, who wants to provide the capital to make this happen? And so we're a very, very interesting situation where tech is no longer the disruptor. We've got SaaS companies, I won't name them, that are basically putting a gun to people's heads saying, you need to spend more with us. Well, we've bought everything we can from you. What else can we buy from you? Like, we don't need anything from you anymore.
Are you talking about NVIDIA?
I'm talking about SaaS companies,
Oh, okay.
right? Yeah, on the software side. So it works like this. It's called asymmetric advantage. $100 drones versus $1 million Lockheed missiles in the Persian Gulf. Who's going to win? The $100 drones, right? You can just send them all you want. You're going to bankrupt the side that has $1 million drones. UPI, I'm here in India. It's a penny per transaction for peer-to-peer. In the US, it's $1.50 for ACH. It's $25 for a Swift wire. Who's going to win? These penny-based gateways, right? That's ultimately going to win. $100 on Zoho versus $1,000 on Salesforce. Who's going to win, right? Pharmaceuticals are 1/10 the cost or 1/100th the cost here in India on generics versus what we have on the West, right? And this is really what we're talking about. At the end of the day, there needs to be a disrupting force that comes out and reshapes industries, creates opportunities, changes the landscape. And that's what technology was pre-AI. Post-AI.
So Gen AI is not that new disruptive force?
No. What happened? What happened in Q2? Every company, including tech vendors, cut budgets in order to pay for AI because they're like, oh my God, I need this. It's just like someone had this big regulatory requirement that you have to deliver on this, and everybody was rushing to go do that. So they stole money from cybersecurity budgets to pay for AI, right? They stole money from marketing budgets and operations budgets to pay for AI. And now everybody's waiting for the payoff. Okay, we're waiting. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Call me in 3 quarters and tell me where the AI tech boom is going to be and who actually made money. Yeah, Microsoft will make money on AI. Meta will make money, even though they're giving it away for free. They're getting data back, which is actually really, really smart again, because that's their model. NVIDIA is going to make money selling chips. Apple might sell some more iPhones. Amazon might sell some better stuff in terms of, their technology or more cloud, and Google will be there. I don't know which companies make money.
So, yeah, Ray, thank you for being with us. You are the most stimulating guest we could ask for, thought stimulating, and we appreciate having you on our show. And be sure to tweet out on or post on X, if you would.
We will formally tweet on X.
Tweet on X.
You can't tweet on X because a tweet is a short thing and a post is a bigger thing.
Oh, yes, it is. So
yeah. No. So thank you. Thanks again so much.
So our next podcast guest is Darryl West, Senior Fellow in the Center for Technology Innovation within the Governance Studies program at the Brookings Institute. Darryl focuses on AI robotics and the future of work. Before Brookings, Darryl was the John Hazen White Professor of Political Science and Public Policy and Director at the Tubman Center for Public Policy at Brown University. Darryl has authored multiple books, including Power Politics, Trump and the Assault on American Democracy, and Turning Point, Policymaking in the Era of Artificial Intelligence. Thank you so much for joining us today, Darryl.
Esther, nice to be with you and Sean.
Thanks, Darryl. So to kick it off, Kamala Harris is known for her background and her closeness to Silicon Valley, both geographically and campaign finance wise. Raising money out of Silicon Valley in the tech world, she's familiar with it. How do you think that closeness might inform some of the policies, tech policies and AI policies, if she does become the next president?
I mean, you're right. As a former attorney general and senator from California, she does have close ties to Silicon Valley, knew all of the major people there, often fundraised from then. But the Democratic Party has shifted a lot over the last decade. Biden, of course, has taken a much tougher stance on technology as public opinion has had a variety of complaints about social media platforms. So Biden has issued tough orders on AI, is cracking down in terms of competition policy and antitrust enforcement. So even though she historically has been close to the tech sector, I actually think she will maintain Biden's tough line on a lot of issues because that's where the party is these days. And also that's where public opinion is on many tech issues.
That's interesting. So, what key AI actions do you think from Harris's time as vice president might she carry over as president? Like, I'm mainly referring to Harris hosting the big tech leaders at the White House and her leadership on the executive order on AI processes.
I think the most important thing a President Harris would maintain from the current administration is just that executive order. I mean, the signature AI move on public policy over the last few years was Biden's executive order, where he basically directed every federal agency to look at a variety of aspects of AI, how they could incorporate it in their mission, how they could get some of the benefits of AI. But then also, he was worried about the problems of privacy, cybersecurity, racial and gender bias, and other sorts of problems, and ask agencies to look at those things in terms of how affected their particular mission. And then wants each agency to come up with ways to mitigate those various problems. So it was a very bold plan on the part of Biden, very comprehensive in what it did. And I would fully expect a President Harris, if she wins the White House, to actually maintain almost all of those things, because Democrats in general, and I would say many members of the public, feel that AI certainly has potential, but there also are a number of problems. People are worried about deepfake videos, for example, in this election campaign. So I would think she would actually maintain at least some of the tough stance that President Biden has endorsed.
So we've already experienced the Donald Trump presidency, and he had some minor moves on AI with a small scale executive order. And we've seen Harris as vice president. So what are the key differences on AI between a President Trump and President Harris?
I mean, the big difference in a Trump administration, and Trump already has announced this, he will repeal the Biden executive order on AI probably on day one, or certainly in the first few days. He's already on record as doing that. He thinks Biden has devoted too much time to regulating the tech sector. Trump thinks the tech sector is the future. That's where jobs are going to come from. That's going to propel the overall economy. He seems comfortable with a more libertarian stance on tech policy. And certainly when he was president, he adopted that stance. I mean, he did have people who proposed various ways in which tech companies could improve their use of technology, but a lot of his measures were of a voluntary nature as opposed to a government mandate or an official regulation. So he was basically telling the tech sector, you need to get your act together, but you should figure out what you think is the best strategy and kind of trusting them to do the right thing.
The next question is when he obviously was the executive order is one of the key things for the Biden administration, and the calls to action by Vice President Harris, such as detecting and blocking AI fraudulent phone calls. Despite this, there remains a lack of uniformity on AI regulation at the federal level. So do you think this could change during Harris' presidency? Because you were talking about Trump being like, the tech sector should figure it out themselves, right? So could she perhaps be the one to push the executive order to the next level of saying, let's have a federal law on AI? And could we see something to the effect of the EU AI Act?
I mean, there are dozens of new bills on AI that have been introduced in Congress. So there certainly is much greater interest in regulating AI than what we saw even 3 or 4 years ago. But I still haven't detected a lot of agreement between the parties on this, or even between the House and the Senate. Like the Senate actually has been tougher on regulating, for example, social media platform treatment of young kids. They're passing legislation in this area. The House seems not interested at all in doing that. So even within each party, there doesn't seem to be a lot of agreement. So the safest prediction in the short run is we're not likely to have a uniform AI regulation bill that comes out of Congress. But what we are seeing is a lot of states are moving in that direction. California, of course, always has been a leader. So they've passed a privacy bill. They've passed a gig economy bill and other sorts of things. Other cities and states are doing the same thing. And I think the worst case scenario for the tech sector is there not being any congressional action and the United States ending up with 50 different sets of laws. Like if you have every state passing an AI bill and the bills are going to be different, like that's a nightmare for the tech sector. Like you don't want to have to build a different algorithm for Illinois as opposed to Texas or Florida. And so if in the absence of congressional action, we're actually seeing a lot of state action, but it's creating all these contradictions of Texas and Florida or Republican states. So they're kind of making changes in conformity with their stance. California and New York, more liberal states, they have a different approach. And so we're ending up with very different laws depending on where the company is based. And that's actually not good for technology. Like the whole bent of technology is to be able to scale up fast. And if you end up with states having contradictory rules, it really undermines that whole scalability benefit of technology.
To follow on that, you mentioned California, and then you have the New York hiring law, right? But with those two, those are really deeply regulated states, right? And tech companies do not necessarily favor those states, right? So I know that we don't necessarily want 50 different laws. Would you say that tech companies also want like strictly guarded laws as well?
I mean, the tech people that I talk with actually have moved towards wanting some regulation, but wanting a lighter touch on regulation, as opposed to, for example, you mentioned the EU Act, which is a very tough bill on regulating artificial intelligence. Many people in the tech community don't want that because they think that's unduly burdensome, too many rules, too many regulations, and that it actually would stifle, some of the tech innovation that American companies have prided themselves on. So they, I think, favor more of an intermediate position. They certainly understand the need for human guardrails. There are understandable consumer worries about privacy, cybersecurity, questions of bias, impact on human safety, what AI is going to mean for the workforce. Is it going to end up taking a bunch of jobs? So all those things are on the agenda, but there doesn't seem to be a big agreement on how to address any one of those particular problems.
Okay, so let's get to the regulatory agency aspect of all this. So everybody seems pretty in consensus that Trump would get rid of the head of the FTC, Senator Packing, and Harris would keep her. But could a President Harris embolden the regulatory agencies to really step it up a notch? FTC is scrutinizing the tech giants for antitrust. Can we see the agency, that agency and others step it up under Harris?
I mean, one of the hallmarks of the Biden administration is he appointed very tough regulatory people to the Federal Trade Commission, which you just mentioned, as well as the Department of Justice, and basically told them, you need to regulate more. You need to worry about protecting consumers. He believes there's anti-competitive actions coming out of a lot of the big tech companies because many of them have a dominant market position in their particular areas. So he really appointed very tough people, especially to the Federal Trade Commission. And so Trump clearly is not going to go that route. Thinks Biden has been too tough on that sector. Certainly would get rid of the current head of the Federal Trade Commission and likely appoint someone much more sympathetic to the industry. Harris, I think, is more likely to lean towards a tougher stance on antitrust enforcement because, for example, in her campaign speeches, she's already talked about the problem of inflation, but blamed it on predatory behavior on the part of large corporations, basically saying, hey, you guys are guilty of jacking up the prices, you're engaging in price gouging, and we're going to go after you if you continue to do that. So if you just listen to what she's saying, she's talking pretty tough on that sector in a manner very similar to what Biden is doing. So we would have to assume she would basically keep that antitrust enforcement thrust of what Biden has done.
One other thing that we've seen is basically some tech leaders switching sides, i.e., Elon Musk, right? He was Democrat, and then he's kind of moved over to support a Trump presidency. So, do you think that Silicon Valley might support a Trump presidency more than a Harris presidency, or is it or is a significant amount of tech support now swinging to Harris?
I think there is a situation where Silicon Valley is pretty divided between Trump and Harris. Obama actually did really well among Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley at that point very much favored Democrats over Republicans. Trump was able to make some inroads, and recently, because there's been a much greater emphasis on regulating AI, it has kind of activated either the libertarian or the outright conservative part of Silicon Valley. So, as you mentioned, people like Elon Musk already has endorsed Trump. Mark Andreessen, another uh, uh, a tech billionaire, is coming out in favor of Trump. But then Harris has her own wealthy individuals, like Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn has endorsed Harris. Mark Cuban has done that. Ron Conway, who's a big venture capital person, has endorsed Harris. She's already had calls on a Tech for Harris platform. I think she's about to organize something venture capital people for Harris. So she is certainly trying to maintain the support among that community. But I think they're not really united at this point. So I don't think Silicon Valley support is going to be decisive one way or the other, because each of the candidates has their own supporters.
Yeah, there was that interesting story in the New York Times yesterday about the PayPal mafia, the founders of PayPal fighting amongst each other out in the open, which Silicon Valley really hasn't done that much in the past. But and then of course you see Mark Zuckerberg above it all, not taking a political position this time. So I did wanted to squeeze in JD Vance here. He was in some ways an understudy of this another tech billionaire, Peter Thiel, and Thiel bankrolled his Vance's Senate campaign. To what extent is he a factor in this election from a tech point of view?
I mean, you're exactly right. Vance comes out of the venture capital community. Peter Thiel hired him to help identify companies that venture capitalists could invest in. Vance then left Thiel's venture capital fund and formed his own fund. So he was active in that area. Vance also worked with Stephen Case, who's actually more on the Democratic side, but they were trying to identify tech investment opportunities in the heartland, the middle part of the country. So Vance certainly has close ties with the venture capital world. But we know if Trump and Vance win, Trump is going to be calling the shots, not JD Vance. Trump is not going to let anybody tell him what to do. I suspect that Trump will have lots of friends in the tech community and certainly will play to them. He will have policies that are probably more tech friendly in the sense of being lighter on regulation and more intrusive in the sector as a whole. Trump also has had this interesting shift on cryptocurrency. I mean, just 2 or 3 years ago, he was almost actively negative on crypto and talking about its risks and money laundering issues and so on. Now he has become a supporter of cryptocurrency. Over the weekend, just gave a big speech at one of the leading Bitcoin conferences. He has some crypto people who are putting money into his campaign. So Trump has gone through his own changes in this area. But I think JD Vance will certainly open up access and open up some additional fundraising opportunities for Donald Trump.
Okay, while we're on the subject of the vice president and their candidates, whoever Harris picks, I don't see any discussion of these 5 or 6 governors' tech backgrounds or their positions on tech. Do you think that's a weakness for Harris that she doesn't have, or does she need to have a vice president who also is to continue, right? Conceivably under a Harris administration, a vice president would lead tech policy because that's what happened under Biden. So is that a factor at all in her considerations for vice president?
It doesn't appear to be a major factor for her. I mean, of the half dozen names that are being circulated, none of them have particularly close ties to the tech sector. None of them actually come from a tech background. None of them come from states that are really seen as leaders in regulating AI or being tough on consumer privacy issues. So they're not really very known commodities on tech related things. I suspect when she makes her choice, it's going to be more in terms of geopolitical considerations, which state would this person help her win, and also the personal fit, like just how she gets along with the individual. Obviously, she wants somebody who is trustworthy for her, who can play the same type of role for her that she played for Joe Biden.
Well, thanks so much for being with us, Daryl. You have a remarkable confluence of tech and politics and government knowledge. It's amazing.
Well, thank you very much, and I enjoyed the discussion.
Yeah, so thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you enjoy this podcast, please give us a thumbs up and on your social, and share it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other major podcast platforms. Encourage your friends to listen and download, and check out Daryl West's work on the internet. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on the Targeting AI podcast.